Hello everybody and welcome to chapter 38 of the book of Shemot as we continue to travel through Tanach. Chapter 38 has 31 verses and it starts in the Koren Sachs Chumash at the top of page 626 and 627. As the construction of the Mishkan continues, we move from the sacred vessels inside to the structures and furnishings that stand outside. But this chapter contains something else that feels surprisingly modern, a full financial report. Alongside altars, courtyards, and wash basins, the Torah pauses to account for every ounce of silver, gold, and copper donated by the nation. This makes chapter 38 one of, if not the earliest example of public financial transparency in Jewish history. And perhaps that is to re-emphasize a point that holiness does not exempt leaders from accountability. In fact, the holier the project, the greater the need for transparency. Our rabbis talk about how people were in doubt as to whether Moshe had used any of the funds collected for his own personal gain. And so as we move into Parshat Pekudei and read about everything that was collected, it's important for us to understand that this was, in some way, removing any doubt that Moshe may have done anything dishonest. In some ways, it feels almost anticlimactic. We've had the grand revelation at Mount Sinai. We've had the drama of the golden calf. We've had the incredible beauty and extravagance of the Mishkan. And now, accounting records. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Spirituality is not only tested in moments of revelation, but in moments of administration. And the Torah is teaching us that holiness isn't just found in the grand moments and the miracles. It's found in the way that we conduct ourselves and the honesty and integrity with which we conduct business. So with that introduction in mind, let us turn to chapter 38, verse 1, where we talk about the copper altar for the sacrifices. Vayas es mizbach ha'ola atzei shittim. He made the sacrificial altar out of acacia wood. Chamesh amos arko. He made it 5 amos long. V'chamesh amos rachbo. And 5 amos wide. Ravua, it was square. V'shalosh amos kamaso. And 3 amos high. Verse 2, Vayas karnosav al arba pinosav. He made horns on its 4 corners. Mimenu hayu karnosav. From the same piece did he make the horns. Vayitzaf oso nechoshes. And he overlaid it with copper. Verse 3, Vayas es kol kalei hamizbeach. And he made all of the utensils for the altar. Es hasiros, the pots. Ve'es hayoim, the shovels. Ve'es hamizrakos, the basins. Es hamizlagos, the forks, ve'es hamachtos, and the pans. Kol kelav asa nechoshes. All of these utensils he made out of copper. Verse 4, Vayas la mizbeach michbar. He made a netting for the mizbeach, masei reshes nechoshes, made out of a copper meshwork. Tachars kakuvo milmata ad chetzio, which extended downwards to the middle of the height of the altar. Verse 5, Vayitzok arba tabaos ba'arba haketzavos. He cast 4 rings on the 4 edges, lemichbar hanachoshes, of the copper netting, batim labadim, to hold the poles with which they would carry the mizbeach. Verse 6, Vayas es habadim atzei shittim. He made the poles out of acacia wood, vaytzaf osam nechoshes, and he overlaid them with copper. Verse 7, Vayave es habadim batabaos. He placed the poles in the rings, al salos hamizbeach, on the sides of the altar, laseis oso bahem, so that it could be carried. Nevuv luchos asa oso. The altar itself was hollow, made of boards. Verse 8, Vayas es hakiyor nechoshes. He made the copper wash basin, ve'es kanon nechoshes, and the copper base, but maros hatzovos ashed savu pesach ohel moed, from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And our rabbis explained that there was an initial reluctance to use the mirrors of the women to be able to make the copper wash basin, because Moshe questioned whether it was appropriate to use items that are otherwise used for making a person look beautiful, whether that is the kind of backdrop with which things should be created for the Mishkan. And our rabbis tell us that Hashem answers and said, actually, these are the most precious items of all. And they go on to explain that the women in Egypt used to use their mirrors to make themselves look beautiful purposely to attract their husbands. At the time when the Jews were slaves in Egypt, the last thing the husbands would have been thinking about was building Jewish families. And our sources explain that it was the women who used these mirrors to encourage their exhausted husbands to preserve family life. And so these mirrors ultimately enabled the survival of the Jewish people. And this is why Hashem insisted that the mirrors be accepted and used for this holy purpose. Verse 9, Vayas esechatzer, he made the courtyard, lifas negev teimana, on the south side, kaleh hechatzer, sheish mashzar, mea ba'amah. The hangings were of finely spun linen and were 100 amos long. Verse 10, Amudehem esrim, there were 20 pillars, Va'adnehem esrim, and 20 sockets, nechoshes, made out of copper, Vaveh hoamudim v'chashukehem kasef, and the hooks of the pillars and their bands were made out of silver. Verse 11, V'lifas saphon, and on the north side, Mea va'ama, it was 100 amos long, Amudehem esrim, there were 20 pillars, Va'adnehem esrim, and there were 20 sockets, nechoshes, made out of copper, Vaveh hoamudim v'chashukehem kasef, and the hooks of the pillars and their bands were made of silver. Verse 12, V'lifas yam, on the west side, Klaim chamishim ba'ama, there were hangings for 50 amos long, Amudehem asara, there were 10 pillars, Va'adnehem asara, and 10 sockets, Vaveh hoamudim v'chashukehem kasef, and the hooks and their bands were made out of silver. Verse 13, V'lifas keidma mizracha, and on the eastern side, chamishim ama, it was 50 amos long. Verse 14, Klaim chamesh esrei ama ela kasef, there were 15 amos of hangings at the shoulder. Amudehem shlosha, there were 3 pillars, Va'adnehem shlosha, and 3 sockets. Verse 15, V'la kasef hashenis, and at the second shoulder, Mizeh u'mizeh l'shar hechatzer, on either side of the gate of the courtyard, Klaim chamesh esrei ama, there were hangings of 15 amos, Amudehem shlosha, Va'adnehem shlosha, with 3 pillars and 3 sockets. Verse 16, Kol, kaleh hechatzer saviv, sheish mashzar, all the hangings of the courtyard were made of finely spun linen. Verse 17, V'hadanim la'amudim nechoshes, the sockets of the pillars were made of copper, Vaveh hoamudim v'chashukehem kesef, the hooks of the pillars and their bands were made out of silver, V'tzipui roshehem kasef, and their tops were overlaid with silver, V'heim chushakim kesef, kol amudei hechatzer, and all the pillars of the courtyard had silver bands. Verse 18, Umasach shar hechatzer, and the screen of the gate of the courtyard, Masei rokem, was an embroidered screen comprised of techeles, of turquoise wool, V'argaman, and purple wool, V'solas shani, and scarlet wool, V'sheish mashzar, and finely spun linen, V'esrim ama orech, it was 20 amos long, V'koma v'rochav, chamesh amos, and the height and width were 5 amos, Le'umas kaleh hechatzer, corresponding to the hangings of the courtyard. Verse 19, V'amudehem arba, there were 4 pillars, V'adnehem arba nechoshes, and 4 sockets, all made out of copper, Vavehem kesef, with silver hooks, V'tzipui roshehem v'chashukehem kasef, and their tops and their bands were overlaid with silver. And verse 20, which brings us to the end of Parashas Vayakhel, V'cholei seidos lamishkan, and all of the tent pegs, V'lechatzer saviv, and for the surrounding courtyard, nechoshes, were made out of copper. Verse 21, where we start the beginning of Parshas Pekudei and the calculations of everything that was contributed to the building of the Mishkan. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, these are the accounts of the Mishkan, Mishkan Hoidus, the tabernacle of testimony, Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe, recorded at Moshe's command, Avodas HaLeviim, the work of which was done by the Leviim, Biyad Isamar ben Aharon HaKohen, under Itamar, the son of Aharon the Kohen. Verse 22, V'tzalel ben Uri ben Chur l'matei Yehuda, and Betzalel the son of Uri, the son of Chur from the tribe of Yehuda, Asa es kol asher tziva Adonai es Moshe, made everything that Hashem had commanded Moshe, which if you recall we said previously, doesn't mean that he literally made everything, but he was responsible and essentially gets the credit for everything having been made. Verse 23, V'ito, and assisting him, Aholiav ben Achisamach l'matei Dan, was Aholiav the son of Achisamach from the tribe of Dan, Charash v'choshev, an engraver and a designer, V'rokem, and an embroiderer, but Cheles with turquoise wool, uva argaman and purple wool, uva soloas ashani and scarlet wool, uva shesh and fine linen. Verse 24. Kol hazahav he'asui lamlacha, b'chol meleches hakodesh, all the gold used in all the sacred work, vayhi zahavat tnufa, and the gold that was offered up as a wave offering, Teisha ve'esrim kikar, 29 kikar, ushva meos ushloshim shekel b'shekel hakodesh, and 730 shekels according to the sanctuary weight. And using standard rabbinic measurements, that's almost exactly 1 metric ton of gold. At today's prices, we're talking about well over £100 million worth of gold alone. Verse 25, V'chesef pekudei hoida me'as kikar. The silver of those recorded in the census came to 100 kikar, ve'elef ushva meos v'chamisha v'shivim shekel, and 1,775 shekels b'shekel hakodesh, according to the sanctuary weight. So we are talking about 3.44 tons of silver, which is worth approximately £2.9 million. Verse 26, Beka lagulgoles machatzis shekel b'shekel hakodesh. 1 beka for every head, a half shekel in the sacred shekel. L'chol ha'over ala pukudim, from everyone included in the census, meben esrim shana v'mala, from the age of 20 and up, l'sheish meos elef u'shloshes alafim v'chamesh meos v'chamishim, which was taken from 603,550 men. Verse 27, Vayhi ma'as kikar ha-kesef, the 100 kikar of kesef, of silver, latsekes es adnei hakodesh, was used to cast the silver sockets of the sanctuary, ves adnei haparoches, and the sockets of the curtain, ma'as adanim lim'as ha-kikar, kikar la'aden, 100 kikar for the 100 sockets, ves ha'elef ushva hameos v'chamisha v'shivim, and from the 1,775 shekels of silver, asavavim lo amudim, he made the hooks and the bands of the pillars, v'tzipa roshehem v'chishak osam, and he covered their tops and made bands for them. Verse 29, unechoshes hatnufa shivim kikar, the copper given as an offering came to 70 kikar, va'alpayim va'arbameos shekel, and 2,400 shekels, which is worth only, by comparison, about £20,000. So all in all, we're looking at close to about £107 million worth of gold, silver and copper being donated to the Mishkan. Verse 30, Vayaspa es adnei pesach ohel moed, with it he made the sockets of the entrance to the tent of meeting, ves mizbach hanachoshes, and the copper altar, ves michbar hanachoshes asher lo, and the copper meshwork that was made for it, ves kol klei hamizbeach, and all the vessels of the altar. And finally, verse 31, ves adnei hechatzer saviv, and the sockets of the courtyard all around, ves adnei shar hechatzer, and the sockets of the gate of the courtyard, ves kol yisdos hamishkan, and all of the pegs of the Mishkan, ves kol yisdos hechatzer saviv, and all of the pegs of the courtyard that surrounded. Just to make a couple of observations as we conclude this chapter, over £100 million worth of gold was contributed. And yet what impresses the Torah isn't the value of the materials, it's the willingness of ordinary people to contribute, until Moshe eventually had to tell them to stop giving. Another thing to keep in mind is that while the gold came from voluntary donations and represented extraordinary generosity, the silver came from something else entirely. Every one of the 603,550 Israelites gave exactly the same amount, 1/2 shekel. That meant rich and poor people, leaders and laborers, everyone contributed equally. And the silver went on to make the sockets that supported the Mishkan. And there's a powerful message here. A community isn't built only by its largest donors. Its true foundation comes when everyone has a stake in it. So that brings us to the end of chapter 38. In chapter 39, we will start to make the uniforms for Aaron and the Kohanim. I look forward to learning that chapter with you. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day.